The vanished pharaoh. The desert sun beats down on the ruins of a city that once dazzled the world. Beneath layers of sand and centuries of silence, a secret has survived, one so disturbing that ancient Egypt tried to erase it from memory. The pharaoh at the center of this scandal was not just forgotten. He was violently removed from every monument, every inscription, every trace that could link him to the throne. His name was chiseled out with such fury that the scars still scream from the stone. But history has a way of keeping its darkest truths alive, no matter how hard someone tries to bury them. What we've uncovered about Akhenaten and the fate of his daughters isn't just another story of royal drama. It's a chilling example of how absolute power can twist even the most sacred bonds. This isn't about palace intrigue or the usual tales of betrayal. This is about a father who turned his own children into tools for his obsession, sacrificing their innocence for a vision that would haunt Egypt for generations. It all began in the golden halls of Thebes, where the Nile's waters shimmered with the promise of prosperity. 6 daughters were born to what seemed like a loving royal couple. Their names, Meritaten, Mikataten, Akhenaten, Neferneferuaten, Setependre, and Nefer-Nefer-Ur, echoed through the palace like a prayer. Each child was a blessing, a hope for the future. Their father, who would become known as Akhenaten, appeared devoted, his palace walls decorated with scenes of laughter and warmth. For a moment it looked like the perfect royal family. But beneath this picture of happiness, something dark was already taking root. Akhenaten's obsession with the sun god Aten was growing, and with it, a dangerous sense of destiny. He began to see himself not just as a king, but as the only voice of the divine on earth. And as his fanaticism deepened, the lives of his daughters would be changed forever. But that was only the beginning. The birth of a new city and a nightmare. Akhenaten's obsession soon demanded more than just new rituals or prayers. In a move that stunned the entire kingdom, he abandoned Thebes, the heart of Egyptian tradition, and ordered the construction of a brand new capital in the middle of the desert. This city, which he named Akhenaten, was to be a place where only his vision mattered, a blank canvas for his radical beliefs. The royal family, including his 6 daughters, were uprooted from everything familiar and thrust into a world built entirely around their father's will. At first, the new city gleamed with promise. Temples rose from the sand, their walls covered in images of the royal family basking in the rays of the Aten. Artists were instructed to capture scenes of domestic bliss, showing Akhenaten as a gentle father surrounded by his daughters. But as the years passed, these images began to change. The princesses were no longer depicted as playful children. Instead, they appeared as extensions of their father's divine presence, almost like living symbols rather than individuals. Their identities faded, replaced by a single overwhelming message. The pharaoh and his family were the only true connection to the gods. Inside the palace, life grew stranger by the day. The daughters, once free to play and learn, found themselves trapped in a world where every moment was scripted, every gesture watched. The city's isolation cut them off from the old court, from friends, and even from their own mother's influence. The rituals that once seemed harmless became relentless, filling their days with endless ceremonies and prayers. The palace, once a place of laughter, now felt more like a gilded cage. But the real horror was still lurking in the shadows. As Akhenaten's religious revolution reached its peak, the pressure on his daughters intensified. They were no longer just royal children. They were pawns in a dangerous game, their futures shaped by a father whose ambition knew no limits. And what happened next would shatter any illusion of safety they might have clung to. The daughters become pawns. As Akhenaten's grip on power tightened, the atmosphere inside Akhenaten shifted from uneasy to suffocating. The city's dazzling temples and sunlit courtyards masked a growing sense of dread among those who lived within the palace walls. The royal daughters, once symbols of hope and prosperity, now found themselves at the center of a disturbing transformation. Their father's obsession with the Aten had crossed a line, turning his own children into living instruments of his radical faith. The first signs were subtle, changes in how the princesses were presented to the public. The eldest, Meritaten, began to appear in ceremonies that had always been reserved for the queen. At first, it seemed like a harmless honor, a way to celebrate her coming of age. But the palace artists were soon ordered to create images that left little doubt about her new role. Meritaten was shown standing beside her father, not as a daughter but as a partner. Her posture, her regalia, even her expressions carefully crafted to blur the lines between child and consort. The message was clear. Akhenaten was rewriting the rules, and his daughters were at the heart of his plan. Inside the palace, whispers of unease grew louder. Servants exchanged fearful glances as they prepared for ceremonies that felt increasingly unnatural. Foreign diplomats, once eager to witness the splendor of the new capital, began sending home reports filled with confusion and alarm. Even the princesses themselves seemed to sense the danger. Their laughter faded, replaced by a quiet, watchful fear. They moved through the palace like shadows, their childhood innocence slipping away with each passing day. The psychological manipulation at play was staggering. Akhenaten had spent years convincing his daughters and everyone around him that he was not just their father, but the living embodiment of divine will. To question him was to question the gods themselves. This twisted logic left the princesses with nowhere to turn, trapped by a system that demanded absolute obedience. And as the ceremonies grew more elaborate, the true extent of their father's ambitions became impossible to ignore. But the nightmare was only beginning. The fate that awaited the royal daughters would push the boundaries of human decency and leave scars that Egypt would try to erase for centuries to come. The queen's disappearance and the deepening darkness. As the palace rituals grew more bizarre and the boundaries between father and daughter blurred, a new shadow fell over Akhenaten. Queen Nefertiti, once the beloved matriarch and the only figure who might have shielded her daughters from their father's ambitions, suddenly vanished from the historical record. No one knows for certain what happened. Some say she died. Others whisper she was exiled, or perhaps she simply faded into obscurity, powerless to stop the unfolding tragedy. Her absence left a void that nothing could fill, and the royal daughters were left utterly exposed to Akhenaten's increasingly erratic will. With Nefertiti gone, the palace became a place of whispered rumors and silent suffering. The eldest daughter, Akhenaten, was now thrust fully into the role of queen, her every move watched and recorded by artists and scribes. The ceremonies that once celebrated family now felt like grim performances, with Akhenaten standing beside her, father in a role that no child should ever have been forced to play. The other princesses watched in terror, understanding that their own fates might soon mirror their sisters'. The psychological toll was immense. The girls, once lively and full of promise, became withdrawn and haunted. Servants described them as moving through the palace like sleepwalkers, their eyes empty, their smiles mechanical. The rituals that filled their days were no longer celebrations of faith, but reminders of their captivity. Every gesture, every word, was dictated by a father who saw himself as the sole voice of the divine, a man whose need for control had eclipsed any sense of compassion or reason. Outside the palace, the world was beginning to take notice. Foreign envoys sent home troubling reports, describing a court gripped by fear and a pharaoh whose actions defied all norms. The traditional priesthood, long at odds with Akhenaten's religious revolution, seized on these stories to warn of cosmic disorder and divine anger. Egypt's allies grew wary, and the once glorious city of Akhenaten began to feel more like a gilded prison than a beacon of progress. But the true horror was still to come. As Akhenaten's desperation for a male heir grew, his gaze turned to his younger daughters, setting in motion a chain of events that would push the royal family and the entire kingdom past the point of no return. The sacrifice of innocence. With Nefertiti gone and Akhenaten forced into the role of queen, Akhenaten's obsession with securing his legacy reached a fever pitch. The pressure to produce a male heir became all-consuming, and when Akhenaten failed to deliver the son he so desperately craved, the pharaoh's attention shifted with chilling swiftness to his next daughter, Akhenaten. She was barely a teenager, yet suddenly found herself thrust into the same nightmare that had already shattered her older sister. The palace artists, once tasked with capturing scenes of joy and harmony, were now ordered to immortalize a new, more disturbing reality. Akhenaten began appearing in official reliefs and carvings, adorned in the regalia of queenship, standing beside her father in ceremonies that left no doubt about her new status. The transformation was not just public, but deeply personal. Servants whispered about the changes they saw in the young princess, her once bright spirit now dulled, her eyes reflecting a pain that words could not express. Behind closed doors, the psychological and physical toll on the royal daughters became impossible to ignore. Fragments of ancient papyrus, preserved against all odds, describe palace physicians being summoned again and again to treat conditions that the official records only hint at. The language is vague, but the meaning is unmistakable. The girls were suffering, their bodies and minds bearing the scars of a life twisted by their father's ambitions. The trauma was not just emotional, but physical, an open secret that haunted the palace corridors. The tragedy reached its most devastating point when Akhenaten died under circumstances the court desperately tried to conceal. Officially, her death was attributed to illness, but the artistic evidence tells a different story. In the royal tomb, reliefs depict scenes of mourning around a young woman lying on what appears to be a birthing bed, attended by midwives and a wet nurse holding a newborn. The implications are inescapable. Rumors suggest that Akhenaten died in childbirth, and that the father of her child was almost certainly Akhenaten himself. The shock of Akhenaten's death reverberated through the palace, but instead of remorse, Akhenaten's response was to double down on his desperate quest for a male heir. The remaining daughters lived in constant fear, knowing that their father's ambitions could claim them next, and what happened next would push the royal family to the very edge of destruction. The final descent, broken daughters and a kingdom in crisis. After Akhenaten's tragic death, the palace was gripped by a silence that felt almost supernatural. But Akhenaten's obsession had not been satisfied. Instead, it grew more desperate, more dangerous. The pharaoh's gaze now fell upon his remaining daughters, each one younger and more vulnerable than the last. The next to be elevated was Akhenaten, who would later be known as Akhenaten. She was still a child, yet suddenly found herself forced into the same role that had destroyed her sisters. The cycle of trauma continued, each daughter's fate sealed by a father who saw them not as children, but as vessels for his twisted vision of divine kingship. Inside the palace, the atmosphere became unbearable. Servants moved quietly, their eyes averted, terrified of drawing attention. The princesses, once lively and full of promise, now lived in a state of constant dread. Their days were filled with endless ceremonies, their nights haunted by the knowledge that any one of them could be next. The psychological manipulation was relentless. Akhenaten's religious system left no room for dissent, questioning. His will was not just disobedience, but blasphemy. The daughters learned quickly that survival depended on perfect compliance, their personalities dissolving under the weight of their father's demands. The artistic record from this period is perhaps the most chilling evidence of all. Reliefs and sculptures show the royal daughters with vacant eyes and frozen smiles, their individuality erased. They appear more like beautifully crafted dolls than living, breathing people. The youngest, Neferneferuer, was so small when she was elevated to queenship that palace servants reportedly wept openly at the sight. The ceremonies marking her new status were conducted before an audience that had grown thin, as even the most loyal courtiers struggled to stomach what was happening. Outside the palace, the world was watching. Reports of Akhenaten's behavior began to spread beyond Egypt's borders, shocking foreign allies and fueling rumors of chaos within the kingdom. The traditional priesthood, long at odds with the pharaoh's religious revolution, seized on these stories to rally opposition. They claimed that Akhenaten's abuses had brought cosmic disorder to Egypt, and that the gods themselves were turning away from the land. The once glorious city of Akhenaten became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, a monument to unchecked power and the suffering it could inflict. But even as the kingdom teetered on the brink, Akhenaten showed no sign of remorse. His daughters, broken and traumatized, were left as living reminders of the price paid for one man's obsession, and the end of his reign would bring a reckoning that Egypt would never forget. Erased from history, the price of absolute power. When Akhenaten finally died in the 17th year of his reign, the sense of relief that swept through Egypt was almost tangible. The city he had built in the desert, once a symbol of his divine ambition, quickly emptied as courtiers, priests, and commoners alike fled back to the old centers of power. The surviving daughters, shattered by years of manipulation and trauma, faded into obscurity, living reminders of a nightmare. The nation was desperate to forget. Their fates, like so much else from this era, were deliberately left unrecorded, their suffering buried beneath layers of silence and shame. But Egypt's attempt to erase Akhenaten's legacy went far beyond simply ignoring his memory. In a campaign of destruction unmatched in ancient history, his name was chiseled from monuments, his images defaced, and every record of his reign systematically obliterated. The violence of this erasure was a testament to the horror he had unleashed. It wasn't just political. Revenge, it was a desperate act by a civilization trying to cleanse itself of a darkness that had nearly consumed it. The stones themselves seemed to bear witness, their scars a silent warning to future generations. Yet despite these efforts, the truth could not be completely buried. Fragments of art, scraps of papyrus, and the battered ruins of Akhenaten still whisper the story of a ruler who believed himself above all law and morality. The rumors and reports that survived, some preserved by foreign diplomats, others hidden by the very priests who once opposed him, paint a picture of a kingdom brought to its knees by one man's unchecked ambition. The suffering of Akhenaten's daughters stands as one of history's most chilling reminders of how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, turning even the most sacred bonds into tools of control and destruction. Today, as archaeologists and historians piece together the evidence, the story of Akhenaten and his daughters forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power, faith, and the human cost of fanaticism. The greatest monsters in history often wore crowns, cloaking their crimes in the language of divine will. And while Egypt tried to erase this chapter, the echoes of what happened in those sun-baked halls still reach us, urging us never to forget the price paid when humanity is sacrificed for the sake of a single man's vision. And so, the ruins of Akhenaten stand as both a warning and a memorial, a place where the past refuses to stay buried, and where the lessons of history demand to be heard. So that's the story Egypt tried to bury, a tale of power, obsession, and the innocent lives caught in its grip. Akhenaten's legacy isn't just a warning from the past. It's a reminder that unchecked power can destroy even the most sacred bonds. The ruins of his lost city still whisper the truth, no matter how hard history tried to silence it. But what do you think? Can the lessons from Akhenaten's reign still teach us something today? Or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes, just in different forms? If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more hidden histories and untold secrets. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss the next story, because the past is full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Are you ready for the next secret? I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, history never truly stays buried.